Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Hope y'all had a lovely week. We are here in Parshah Vayikra, the first Parsha of Leviticus. And we are looking at a text from Noam Elimelech, which is on the first line of the book, which says, "He called to Moses, Adonai spoke to him from the tent of meeting. Vayikra el Moshe, Vayedaber Adonai elav me'ohel moed lemor." So it looks as if it would have been better to write, God called out to Moses and spoke to him, so that we know who called out to Moses, rather than the existing form of the verse, which is not specific and leaves the identity of the caller unknown. So for the non-Hebrew speakers out there, the first word Vayikra says, and he called, which, you know, from a literary standpoint might be an odd way to start a book, because who is he? We don't know who he is. Which raises the question, why does the book start like that? Why doesn't it say God called out to Moses?
Good question.
Good question. I share that question.
Though it, you know, to me, it says it leaves the identity of the caller unknown. It doesn't really. If the Bible says, and he called, we're going to assume it means God unless we've been told otherwise, right?
Sure. That's a good assumption.
Right.
There's a person who's receiving a call in the Bible or in the first 5 books. It's a good assumption it's Moses too.
Right.
Yeah. Right, but it is strange. It's starting a new book. This is like, and you would think, I mean, just like they start any other section in the Torah, any other section, even if the previous section said that God spoke to Moses the word, these following words saying, the next paragraph says God spoke these words to Moses saying.
Mm-hmm.
So this is anomalous, that it's strange. Why is it that it just says that he called out to Moses? He called to Moses.
Right. And it's strange, I could, in some sense, even see it a little bit more, although the question would still be there, if it just said, he called to Moses, he spoke to him from the tent of meeting. But it's sort of doubly strange to me that it does tell us who, it does identify God, but it waits until the second half of the verse to do so. So it's not that it's not telling us, it's just withholding that. It's kind of burying it.
Fantastic.
Which is somehow stranger to me than not saying it at all, because, Geo, you're right. We can infer that this is who is doing the calling. So it feels the need to tell us, it just doesn't feel the need to tell us first.
Right.
It wants to open with some uncertainty.
That's a much better formulation of the question. It's like, it does say God 3 words later, so why not just put it at the beginning?
Right. Why not lead with that? The whole thing could be a little bit more clear and concise.
Mm-hmm.
Someone could have been confused and thought that he doing the calling was some other character than God, because he called to Moses, God spoke to Moses. Is this a different subject doing the calling and the speaking? Now, I mean, it's pretty obvious it's not, but
right.
Why would you leave that ambiguity?
Right.
It makes me think of the from Jonathan Safran Foer's Everything is Illuminated. There's this line in there that talks about this group who always starts their sentences with the word and, as if they were mid-thought in their head and they expected you to just pick up the train. And obviously he gets that from this type of thing in the Bible, but this
Right.
is like a particularly, like, this isn't just like, and God spoke. This is like, it seems very much like we're in the middle of something here. And you don't even need to say the subject, because we're already in the middle. You already know it's God. We're already in the middle of the subject, which then asks, so why the rest of the time do we have to specify?
Right. I guess the other, right, you could see it as just a continuation with however the last verse of Exodus left off.
Right.
Right. That God's appears, just explains how God is appearing over the tent of meeting.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, but no, yeah, still. Cool. What does he say?
So this can be understood based on the following teaching of the Zohar regarding the miniature Aleph written at the end of the word Vayikra. It is small when the Shekinah is out of place. So so that is understandable in the written text of the Torah scrolls, there are occasions where certain things are written differently than normal. And this is one of them, where the word Vayikra, which ends in an Aleph, the Aleph is always written small.
In this word.
Yes, thank you. Sorry. In this word, Vayikra, the Aleph is always written small in every Torah. In this one instance.
Right, so this miniature small Aleph teaches us something.
Right.
Teaches us that it is small when the Shekinah is out.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. The Shekinah is out of place. We just finished constructing the tabernacle. I feel like we just said, what was the previous verse? That God is resting there in the pillar of cloud and God's presence. So
right.
What happened in that space? You know, if you're going to look at a Torah scroll this week, I mean, you probably won't have a chance to, but if you could imagine, book of Exodus ends, and then the book of Leviticus doesn't start on the next line. They give, the scribes usually give you that, 3 or 4 space, white space before they start again. So what happened in between?
Right. So to fill in knowledge in case anybody missed that, Shekinah is the presence of God, the dwelling of God, the presence of God that is dwelling within the world. We've just finished building the Mishkan, which is the same root. It's the dwelling place for the presence of God. So as Rabbi Abe just said, the presence of God comes and rests upon the Mishkan, and suddenly the Zohar is claiming it's out of place. What does that mean?
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering, I mean, this is just the question. It's the question you just said. But really, what does it mean on the most basic level here to say that the Shekinah is out of place? Because I can think of it as meaning in the kind of physical sense of the Torah narrative that we're describing. Here's this dwelling place for the Shekinah, but the Shekinah is not there. But I can also think of it on a much bigger kind of cosmic level, that the Shekinah, the presence of God in the world, is somehow out of place. And given that, I don't really know what that... I don't know, where is the Shekinah then, if the Shekinah is out of place? This just raises a lot more questions for me, I guess.
Is the divine presence, the Shekinah, supposed to not be in the world? Right? Is being in the world it being out of place?
Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe what I want to say is that this makes me ask, okay, if the Shekinah is out of place, where is the place that it's supposed to be? Where would in its place be for the Shekinah? And where actually is it if it's not there? I don't know. It just seems like a kind of strange, out of place.
I mean, Geo, you'll correct. I mean, the Shekinah, right? God's kind of, presence, whatever you want to call it, is supposed to be in this world. That's the piece that we can access of God. So it out of place means, I mean, I'm just trying to jump into a mystic, how they would have this Noam Elimelech view it. We sinned, and therefore something happened to make the Shekinah, make God out of our place. The other interesting thing, then becomes, we'll see how he takes it, but that doesn't mean that every then year when we read Vayikra, we're like, are we reenacting somehow that God is out of place? Are we reliving it in some ways? Like that would be something interesting to see if he goes there. I don't know if he will.
I was wondering about that as well, and if we can imagine, like, this is just real kind of mystical speculation, but some kind of messianic future in which the Shekinah is fully restored, then would the Aleph in this word suddenly grow to the full size?
Yeah, that's what they're in heaven. That's what they're doing.
Right, that's right.
And they're reading the Torah scroll in heaven. Vayikra ends with a large Aleph.
Wow, beautiful.
So, Rabbi Abe, you said something about the Shekinah is supposed to be in the world.
I think so, right?
And I want to put a question mark on that, on the word on the phrase "supposed to be."
Okay.
For the Kabbalists, it is inherently the case that the Shekinah is in the world.
Sure.
Is that the original intent? I don't know. There's this brokenness of the world that exiles the divine presence. So does that mean that the Shekinah being in the world is the Shekinah being out of place?
You know more about mysticism than I do, so I hope you can answer the question.
I think it's unclear. I think I agree with you that the Shekinah is supposed to be in the world.
Yeah.
But I'm not fully confident on that.
All right, well, let's hope.
Yeah. So just the other thing before we move on, I think it's worth noting we're talking about this Shekinah being out of place, and Rabbi Abe, it looks like you're at work, but it's Thursday at 1:10 p.m. and Danny and I are both at our respective houses. We are not in our place that we are supposed to be. So I think it's an interesting, whether or not every year we're reenacting this out of placeness at this very moment, we at least maybe.
Well, with God's help, next Sefer Vayikra we'll be studying this together.
Hashana Haba'a Bebeth Shalom.
The Beth Shalom boardroom.
Sounds good.
See you after Kiddush.
End of year. Okay. Our verse describes the time the people were in the desert rather than at the central place of God's glory, the temple of Jerusalem. The verse therefore begins with "he called Moses," implying that she, the Shekinah, the miniature Aleph, called out to Moses. Okay, let's pause there. So first off, he seems to be interpreting this out of placeness as the desert, I think, and not the temple.
Yeah, not Jerusalem. Yeah,
right. The Mishkan is like the home away from home, but not the actual home.
But that's where they were. Well, they couldn't have been in Jerusalem. They hadn't gotten there yet. You got to wait 6 more books. It's like, I'm sure he's like any mystical person. They're not reading this historically, but that doesn't feel like such a fair, like it's out of place. Well, that's what they were. They weren't meant to be in Jerusalem. Anyways, but he's not concerned with that question.
Not meant to be in Jerusalem yet, right? That Jerusalem could be the place for the presence to be home before it gets there.
Sure.
There seems to be a certain amount of like fatedness in this statement.
Okay.
Kind of puzzling over the second sentence here. The verse therefore begins with "he called Moses," Vayikra, implying that she, the Shekinah, the miniature Aleph, called out to Moses.
What? That makes total sense, you know?
Oh yeah, it's so obvious, yeah. The verse therefore begins with. So I guess the way I'm inclined to read this now is that the verse begins with he called Moses. It doesn't identify God called Moses in order to suggest to us that the one calling Moses is actually contained in this word Vayikra, where we see the miniature Aleph, and not in the name of God. I don't know if that makes sense. That's kind of how I'm reading that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know, I don't want to posit a response until I read the next
Great.
one sentence. But I think you're right, but I want to read the next sentence.
Awesome.
But I think we're not ready for the next sentence yet.
Okay.
So the divine presence is usually referred to as female in the Kabbalistic texts, but the Kabbalistic texts have no issue with mixing up pronouns. So the fact that it says he in no way means it can't mean she in terms of the Shekinah within Kabbalah. But somehow this, so it says the Aleph is small when the Shekinah is out of place, and then it goes on, it shifts it a little bit and says that it seems to say that the Aleph, the miniature Aleph itself, is the Shekinah, right?
Mm-hmm. It's very strange.
Which Aleph, being the first letter, is the number 1. So there's this mystical connection with Aleph and the divine oneness. It's also the silent letter, so it's like that hiddenness of God. And so this miniature Aleph seems to me to be talking about that aspect of the divine that has shrunk down from the infinite so that it can dwell with us here in the world. Therefore, it's the presence, the small Aleph.
But it's still out of place, though.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So while what you had just described seemed like a not positive, but a act that God would want to maybe, I'm not going to put in, but like, it seemed like the way that you described it, that's a good thing. It's good that God is with us.
Mm.
I wouldn't want to live in a world where God wasn't with us. But this does seems to be that if the Shekinah is out of place, that's got to be a bad thing.
Mm. Right, but I mean, you're saying that made me think sometimes it's good and important to be out of place.
Yeah, we might learn something.
That's when you grow. That's when you learn, right?
Sure.
Now, is that when God learns? When God's out of place? I don't know if we can make that step, but sometimes maybe it's good for us if the Shekinah is out of place, which does seem like a somewhat radical statement for the Kabbalists.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay. You want to keep going?
I'm eager. Yeah. I want to see how he takes the next sentence.
But following the initial call, Moses turned to the service of the Creator with all his power, sanctified himself greatly, and achieved the rung of Adonai spoke to him, Adonai being the divine name of compassion.
Mm-hmm.
So somehow, I'm going to try to take a stab at what he means. When it says Vayikra el Moshe, if the verse starts with that means that there was some essence, God's essence, presence was out of place. Therefore, we don't know the answer as to why that was, but it's out of place. So that's why that word Vayikra is used. Small aleph signifies that there's something going on here. Then, I guess Moses hears that call and realizes, something's weird here or something's not right. So therefore, Moses has to sanctify himself. And then he's able to get to the point where it's Adonai, Yud He Vav He, which is the presence, God's present and not out of place anymore. and then God can speak to him.
So is this showing God's compassion or Moses' compassion?
I didn't read it yet. I know that that name of God is the name of compassion. It seems like, so right now I'm just getting that there was some awareness on Moses' part. And he had to shift gears. He had to change something that was going on in order to connect to God at a different level.
Right. One of the thoughts that I had based on what you said is this idea of Moses is here and he hears the divine presence calling out to him from some form of out of placeness. And Moses has this stirring of compassion for the divine presence, perhaps. So turns to the divine. And then, a common theme in Kabbalah is that our actions or God's actions parallel our actions, right? So Moses bestowing compassion upon God could cause God to bestow compassion back. Bless you. Bless you.
Right, nice.
Yeah, it feels like to me the answer to your question, Geo, is God having compassion here, or is Moses having compassion? Is yes, both. That I guess what's really interesting to me about this verse or this rereading is that when I read the first verse of Vayikra, it seems to me that I'm reading a description of one thing that's happening, and God called to Moses and spoke to him. It's like it's one action, and here's kind of breaking it down into two actions. There's a sequence,
Mm-hmm.
and I think, yeah, and it seems like in the second one there's a compassion on both sides. Moses has achieved the rung of being this kind of vehicle of compassion in some way.
Yeah, this is what's always so great about these mystical readings is that this verse would not be this verse is not an interesting verse.
Right.
But when you have your kind of Kabbalistic mystical thinking hat on, all of a sudden this verse becomes an entire theology.
Right.
Which is just, I've never really thought about that. So that's pretty interesting.
Right. And I would say even more, I think often it's the verses that seem the least interesting that become the most fruitful in this kind of mystical imagination. Because the verse telling us that God told Abraham to kill his son, there's already a lot of theology there. But the verse telling us this kind of mundane, boring thing, that's where you have to really build up your system in order to make it part of mystical Torah.
Right.
So yeah, I agree with you. It's just really cool to see that.
Yeah. Yeah, let's see how he continues.
This is also the meaning of King David's prayer. You, Yud-He-Vav-He, are enthroned forever. Okay. In our times, due to our sins, the Shekinah is in exile. Therefore, when intending to judge the people of Israel, the Holy Blessed One, out of compassion, has to rise from the throne of judgment and sit upon the throne of mercy. In contrast, the Messianic time will be an era of absolute compassion, and there will be no need to rise from the throne of judgment and shift from one throne to the other.
Okay.
So just a little Kabbalistic and Midrashic background on this. In the Talmud and the Midrash, it says that God spends God's time between the throne of judgment and the throne of mercy. And so, the idea is on Yom Kippur, when we're being judged, we want God to stand up from the throne of judgment and to move to the throne of mercy, such as to have mercy upon us. The Kabbalists run with this in all kinds of directions and really just set up a large framework of two sides of God being judgment and compassion, or mercy, or chesed. And in the Zohar, it says essentially that So pre-Zohar, Jewish theology tends to say that the reason the temple is destroyed and the reason we are exiled from the land of Israel is because we sinned in whatever it is that we did back in the day. And the Kabbalists come along and they add to that when the temple is destroyed, which is presumably, which is the home of the Shekinah on earth, not the mobile home of the Mishkan, but the actual home. So when we go into exile, the Shekinah goes into exile with us. So what do we make of this paragraph?
Well, he's jumped from what's going on with the Israelites currently in the moment to something else, which I'm just trying to wrap my head around. I thought he was going to continue with something about what was presently going on for the Jewish people at the time. So, I mean, the answer of why the Shekinah is out of place for him, at least if we're just reading it through the Leviticus story, is that they're not yet in Jerusalem. They're on their way, I guess, right? They're on their way. Yeah. But they're not there yet. And so that's why it's out of place. And now he's saying, now in our times, there's also an out of placeness because that's due to our sins. I love the bird chirping in the background. It's a nice background.
A bird.
So it seems so Geo, I think you're right in wondering who's making. In the previous paragraph, you're like, okay, who's moving where? Did God have to move to? So now he's saying, nowadays for him, Melech, God has to do this movement. God has to, when God is calling out to us, or God is, when God is interacting with us or judging us, I don't know, whatever he would call it, examining us, God has to go from the place of judgment to a place of mercy. So there's a movement there as well.
But neither of those seem to imply an out of placeness.
No, it is an out of placeness because God's supposed to be sitting always in the throne of mercy. That messianic times, an era of absolute compassion, God's not going to have to do any movement.
God gets to retire.
Sit back.
We all get to retire.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I'm reading it similarly, that God is literally displaced in the current state of being, constantly displaced, in the sense of actually God is in this place and then must move to another place, back and forth, in order to interact with us in a way that is honest and life-affirming and whatever. But in this messianic future that's being described here, nothing will be displaced. Everything will be where it needs to be. And that includes God, and presumably that includes, us as well in our relationship to God.
I'm seeing this I'm having this sympathetic view of God here in this paragraph. Again, to bring it back to our current situation, I'm here working from home, and it's not like tasks are different if I'm at the shul here, but there's something about not being in the right place where it's what do I do now? Do I have to do this? Do I have to do that? And
right.
I kind of have this image of God up there with these two chairs just being where do I go? What do I do? And being very frazzled, God being frazzled and disoriented, because the presence, I bring some meditation into it, God being present, that if that presence leaves, then God is what's going on? And so if Messianic time kind of is God's being able to meditate again and calm down and just sit.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to try to read it back now into the Leviticus, the Vayikra piece, because I don't know, if anything, this feels like the peak of closeness between God and the Jewish people. I get it. He's saying, no, they're not, because there is something out of place because it's not in Jerusalem, in kind of the place. But other than that, they've just built the they just finished building the tabernacle. God's presence is there. Now God is speaking and commanding and talking about, it's going to be all these whole list of sacrifices and ways that you can draw close to God. Maybe it's dry. But
I would disagree with that. I would say the peak of the closeness is probably Sinai, after which they have this big fall with the golden calf. And this is God calling from a distance and saying, this is how you get close to me again. Right? Do these sacrifices. The korban comes from the root of like to draw close, the sacrifice, the way to draw yourself closer to God. This is God calling out from the distance, saying, I know everything's messed up, but there's a way back.
Okay, that's fair. I'm willing to concede that point. So everything, so the peak,
and
right?
I see yours as well, by the way. Too.
No, but what's helpful about your comment is it kind of reorients like what's the Jewish story post the golden calf. And it's just like, so for you, it's for what you're saying, it's this constant trying to return back to God. Interesting.
Okay. This hope is expressed here and in the prayer, you, Yud He Vav He, are enthroned forever. It's that same psalm. No, that's not.
It's a lamentation.
It's
same words, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
And continuing, your throne endures for all generations, from Lamentations.
Just to pause really quick. So this hope is the hope of this messianic future in which there's total compassion. Is that right?
So it looks like to me.
Okay, great.
That's good.
Shekinah's glory is still present among the righteous. The prayer offered is that despite the decline of the generations, may your throne be upon us in every generation, and in your great compassion may the light of your presence hover over us. Amen.
Amen. That's quite his middle line there, but right after his Lamentations quote, that was like his own vision.
Yeah.
Which is pretty bold.
Which the Shekinah's glory is still present among the righteous?
Yeah, he just built up this whole thing that Shekinah is not present. It's out of place.
Right.
And I was like, actually, and I would imagine that I don't know much about Noam Elimelech, but what I do know about him, from what I've heard from people that know much more about it than me, is that he loves this whole idea of the righteous person, the tzaddik, and he builds up this whole thing and theology about the righteous person. So I wouldn't be surprised if in the Hebrew, he's saying that it's among the tzaddikim, because he's trying to build up this sense of that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's totally radical, because he just told us that doesn't exist, or it's out of place. And now he's saying, well, it is in place for the righteous.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it's in a place doesn't mean it's in the right place.
I think that's what he's trying to say.
I don't know.
Well, it might not be in all of the, it's fully in its right place. But what feels to me essential here is that you might have been thinking through all of this that you can't access it. It's in exile. It's far away.
Right.
Sorry for you.
Mm-hmm.
And now you see, it might not be in its place, but it's still possible to to access the Shekinah, to come into contact with it through righteous human beings.
Mm-hmm. Right, which just add another layer to that. We've just finished going through this whole building of this tabernacle that has all of these laws, and now we're sitting here in 1600s in Poland, somewhere around there, 1700s.
Yeah,
No, it's gotta be-
1700s,
yeah.
late 1700s for him.
Late 17. And not only we don't have the temple, we don't have the Mishkan, right? So it's like even that out of place temporary home that they had is gone. So where is God? Is God still with us? And we, the righteous, if we are the righteous, those who are the righteous,
Right.
are the dwelling.
If you're Elimelech.
Right. Those people are the Mishkan. They are the dwelling place for the Shekinah, even though not the ideally hoped one, the one we have.
Mm-hmm. So how would we reread this back into the opening verse? Because it seems that what he's describing here, the Shekinah is in exile, but it is still present through the righteous, is what he sees Moses doing here. Does that seem right? The Shekinah is in exile. That's what this little Aleph means. But Moses, the righteous one, is able to still bring the presence of this exiled Shekinah. And so he's kind of, is it right that he's rereading this verse as describing exactly that process and that possibility?
Mm-hmm.
For us.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah, I think that's totally, yeah. Right. There's going to be an initial call from God. He doesn't talk about how you hear that call, but there's going to be a call. Figure out how to hear it. Maybe that's what it means to be a righteous person.
Figure out how to hear it, yeah.
Then you've got to sanctify yourself greatly.
You become a tzaddik.
Right.
Nice.
That's always helpful. That's right. Sometimes we tend to forget that when we're studying these pieces. It's okay, now that you have the whole teaching, you got to reread it back into the verse, and then
right.
How is that verse now being read as a teaching to you as an individual?
Right. And there's something I can find kind of comforting in this, actually. I might be me sitting in my house in Memphis in 2020 feeling like the Shekinah's exiled and inaccessible, or feeling the same things in Ukraine in the year 17 whatever. It's like, no, this isn't the first time that the Jewish people have had this experience. And it's not even like some other, lowly schlub like me, but like for Moses too, the Shekinah was in exile, and it was up to him to step up and bring it back. So there's something kind of nice about that. There's also something sad about it that we've been spending so long with the Shekinah in exile, but I can see it as kind of comforting that this is even, in our tradition, like the greatest prophet couldn't take for granted this intimacy with God that I also can't take for granted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it gives us a certain power and responsibility. Because what is it that Moses does, aside from sanctifying himself, is he brings God into the world, and he brings compassion into the world.
Right.
And that's something we can do. And particularly at the moment, like how do we specifically do that when we're locked in our homes, right? And when we're not able to physically be in a community, how can we do it in a virtual way?
Right. Well, when our community is exiled in some kind of real sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also still. The piece that I'm really taking away from this teaching is that line in the beginning, which leaves the identity of the caller unknown. I think that's a beautiful piece of thinking about how can we figure out how to access God's voice or the divine. It's not going to be clear. It's gonna feel like it's some unknown, and that for me feels like a very relevant 2020 question.
Powerful.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. It's beautiful. Right, the opening of this, he called to Moses. Who called to Moses? Turns out that it's God. But like, it raises the possibility, right? Like, we might be experiencing the same call in so many moments of our lives. And it suggests to me to just kind of be open to that everywhere in all things. It's not going to say, hey, Danny, you know, this is God reaching out to you. Which, I don't know. I think there's something,
Nice.
right. I don't know, something nice about that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Shkayach, I want to see what do Art Green and his students say about the
As opposed to our temple-centered past or our messianic future, our current reality is that of exile. In this reality, it is human effort that determines whether God will manifest in harsh judgment or in expansive compassion. In this teaching, the Hasidic master has transformed the lament over the destruction of the temple into a prayer that the righteous people will succeed in their work of being the seat of divine compassion in the world.
Well, that's powerful. I didn't really pick up on that, but what he's done with this verse from Lamentations, which is a book of grieving for the destruction and the exile, and he's kind of flipped it around into telling us about the possibility of humans, you know, bringing divine compassion into the world. That's beautiful. That's really cool. That's great.
Yeah, we did not pick up on that in our reading. But yeah, no, right. This verse, it should be read as one of, God, we know that this existed at some point. We know that you exist always, but right now it's pretty gloomy. And he's saying, he's spinning it.
It's the gloomiest book of our tradition in some really important ways. And he's reinterpreting that to be about our capability.
Right.
And our ability to connect with God. And it's actually about, the book originally is kind of about the opposite.
Yeah, nice.
Right. That passage that's from is like, everything is terrible. Everything is falling apart. But you last forever. So why have you forsaken us and forgotten us? Please come back to us and we'll come back to you. This is the very end of the book.
Yeah. Right, because when we did read it, I was like, what prayer are we talking about? Noam Elimelech's prayer. He made it up. I mean, he first to make, Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, any last thoughts on this?
This is beautiful.
Good stuff.
Yasher koach to you both.
Yasher koach.
Yasher koach to anybody who's listened to this. If you'd like to reach out to us, let us know what you thought. Give us some thoughts of your own. We'd be happy to hear what you have to say.
Yep.
Please do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Have a lovely Shabbos.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.